All right, we are live. Welcome to Are You There, God? It's Kira and Phil. And it's not Kira and Phil this week, it's Kira and Jackson. Phil is taking some much needed rest this week. As we have been kind of talking about over the past few weeks, October has seemed to be kind of the month that everything that was supposed to happen in 2020 is happening in October of
Yes.
2021. So all of our weddings and funerals and stuff. And Phil was like, I need to take some time. So super glad to have our guest co-host here today, Jackson. And you say your last name Davy?
Yes.
Okay, like it, I was like, oh no, it's gonna be something.
Oh no, what was your alternative translation? I want to
It's
hear
like
it.
Davy? I don't know.
Ave.
Devay? Like
Yes. That's fine.
um
I'd love to hear that. That'd
So
be great.
I am Kira Austin Young. I am the priest in charge of St. Anne's Episcopal Church in Nashville, Tennessee. And Jackson, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah. So Jackson Davy, not DeVay, even though that sounds a lot more fun. I am originally from Montana, but now live here in beautiful, sometimes southeastern Virginia, here in Norfolk. Um, Go Tides. I was thinking of what sports teams are playing right now. We have a baseball team. There we go. And I'm just happy to be here. I like to be the resident young people for folks. And so I'm glad I resonate with the October and November being the busy months, because I and my wife are planning our like wedding 2.0
Yeah.
for November 7th. And so it's basically like, remember all of those big deals that you made last month? Got to do them again. So everything we postponed, we are re-upping and re-talking to people, and it has been both a blast to get to choose all these fun little decorations and things now, but we are also just sort of living life and trying to get back on the old wedding train. So that's been a blast, but
So
also terrifying.
did you have a pandemic wedding?
Yeah, we had a little mini moni in our church garden, where it's both of our families and some pals, and we basically gave everyone disposable cameras and just told them take a take a whole bunch of photos, whatever you want to take a photo of, do it. Um, so we did have a little wedding, but now we get to invite some friends from around the country over,
Yeah.
um, and it'll be good fun to see some of the Montana folks and
Yeah.
California folks and whoever else, Illinois folks, all over.
Yeah. I too had a pandemic wedding. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, just in our cathedral chapel with like four people there. And
Yeah.
it was, it was really lovely, even though it was not what we had kind of originally planned. But that's it still turned out wonderfully. Okay. You look frozen. Um Now you're back. Okay.
I'm sorry. I just all of a sudden it like disappeared. No warning.
So I'm gonna just, even though we've kind of opened, I'll open us in a little in prayer in the collect for the week. And
Oh,
if there's
absolutely.
something that hits you about the collect, we can chat about it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the Lord be with you.
That's with you.
Let us pray. Lord, we pray that your grace may always precede and follow us, that we may continually be given to good works. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.
Amen. Oh, I mean, already grace preceding me is definitely needed. Right now in life, I've gone through a little bit of craziness, trying to find a new job, and have been on probably like a 2 month job hunt, and where now I am a reading tutor at a middle school.
Okay.
Um, and I told him in my interview, I have a lot of energy. I love working with kids. I have a degree in English. but I have no real academic ways of teaching kids. And they're like, don't worry, we will give you the strategies.
Mhm.
So I am constantly looking for grace as they give me this big assignment of taking on people's children and teaching them or helping them. And so that's a big thing for me right now is that I'm just gonna need some grace because things are gonna get a little messy.
Yeah, I love that image of grace both preceding and following us. It makes me feel like
Mhm.
I'm just like wrapped in a cocoon of grace, and like no matter which
Yeah.
way I turn, God's grace is there, and that's a really helpful image to me. All of and it's in the Psalms too of just like where can we go from you, God? Like,
Yeah.
nowhere is the answer. And that sometimes that makes me angry. I want to like escape and not have God there.
Mhm.
But most of the time, I think that's a beneficial and comforting image.
Yeah. And I think it's just like grace is so good, especially as like a thing that's both behind me and forward, is that like I I have always kind of clenched up when people are like I mean very endearingly, but they say like God has a plan and purpose for you. And I'm like, I don't know if I know the plan or the purpose right now. And I don't know if I'm fully there for it. I like, I've just been I ate like half a bag of Oreos or something. I don't know if I'm the right
Is that part
vessel
of
right
God's
now.
plan and purpose for me?
Yeah, I don't know if that's he might have to like give me like a 15-minute heads up. Okay. Um, and then like I just having it be that actually like there's totally room for you to not be great at it has been very confident, really very comforting. It helps me feel a little more confident when I jump into things because I mean I try to help out with our young adults group here at our church. Um, and I try to come up with cool questions. We'll listen to a podcast and like come together. And sometimes I sound really smart. And sometimes I say things and everyone just says, what? And we just have to sit there for a bit. And then I say, well, what I meant was this. And then hopefully that sounds smarter the second time around.
Yeah.
Um, and I like grace just kind of lets you be a fool. Uh,
Mm.
and you know
Hmm.
what? We can be fools for Jesus.
Yeah. No, that's
Hashtag.
one of my that's so my husband is I don't know how to describe this. My husband is a graduate of Ringling Brothers Clown College. And
Wow.
he's not currently active as a clown, but he has that in his
Is
background.
there a
And
licensure? Is there clown licensure that you carry around?
there is not, but like your clown college is like apparently there's like a whole hierarchy of clowns,
Mm.
with like Cirque du Soleil clowns being, the top of the heap.
Uh,
But this idea of, and I ended up kind of preaching about it the day that Easter was on April Fools a few years ago. And this idea of that kind of like being fools for Christ and the way that in historically like the jester or the court the court joker is
mhm.
able to kind of have their own power over the like actual power of the king or the ruler or whoever
Yeah.
by this kind of like but it's like this sideways power and
Hmm.
I find that very fascinating when it comes to kind of the life of faith because I think I'm so drawn to kind of the paradoxes of Christianity that, and we get that
Yeah.
in our gospel for this week that, the first will be last and the last will be first. And like, what does that mean? And then you kind of see that in not only in what Jesus says, but it's throughout the whole Bible, right? That like it's the younger son that is the one who, the lineage passes through, or
Yeah.
um it's not some famous, big shot person that is the son of God. It's this like, backwater Roman Empire you know, oppressed minority, like artisan guy, son of an artisan, you know,
Yeah.
disgraced mother, like, and
Yeah.
that's just like, I don't know, that like the story of that is very compelling to me.
Yeah. I think in a lot of ways, on the flip side of it too, I think not to just have the positive side, but also just kind of in a space where people can just be messy, both with the positive, sort of going forward, exciting outlook, but also people can be messy and absurd in ways where things can be definitely difficult too, um, which has been so comforting, I think, also in this year, um, as things are still tumultuous and things are still getting figured out. Um, there is still plenty of things that we kind of just have to sit with, and we can be kind of, you know, messy, and still God's there and can still hear us, even if we don't properly, you know, walk through grief or walk through everything that we're struggling with. um and that, you know, we'll still see God there. And that's just I think kind of great that we don't have to imagine that we're supposed to be there, that we've been sent there, that we can be just kind of stumbling through these things, and still, like, that's where we're going to see God, either on, you know, sending ourselves into exciting moments or in terrifying moments. Um, that grace lets us be messy, either to be our best, or sometimes just kind of embrace our messy, unattractive selves, and that works out well.
Yeah. Yeah, that
Yeah.
I really chafe against that sort of God has a plan for you, God has a purpose for you, which like I mean I do think that's true
Mhm.
in maybe kind of the broad scheme of things. But
Yeah.
also I felt so much I somehow internalized this as like a young person, as a teenager and kind of into my 20s, that I was like, I need to find this path. And like once I'm on the path, then like I'll be doing all of the things that like I'm supposed to do. And if I make the wrong decision, then how will I know? How can I get back on the path that I'm supposed to be on? And in one of our sermons for our one of our clergy gatherings, my bishop kind of asked a question that was like, what is God doing in this moment? And I thought that was
Mhm.
a really, or like, what is God doing here in this kind of space? Yeah, that like feels tumultuous, that feels uncertain. Um, and that to me was a much more helpful image than kind of like, let me just get on this path. And like, if I do everything right, then the doors will open and it'll be easy. and,
Yeah.
um, and you know, trying to find like the one job I'm supposed to do, and even going through the discernment process for the priesthood, it felt like the getting ordained was like this brass ring, and once I had the brass ring, like everything would kind of start to make sense. And unfortunately that did not happen. And what, what they did not tell me was like discernment is a lifelong thing, and it's certainly not
Yeah.
just for clergy, it's for everyone. You know, is it about a job? Is it about where I'm going to live? Is it about following a spouse who has a great job opportunity? It's about where are you going to send your kids to school? You know, I mean, discernment is exhausting and constant.
Oh, yes. It's like, I think about that because in undergrad I did English and journalism, and um, like most stereotypical undergrads, especially English undergrads, I was like, well, I kind of have an idea of what to do, but I don't know how that's gonna happen. Especially living in Montana, there is
Mm,
not a heaping demand for English majors. Um, so someone said, you know what? We need more lawyers who read broadly. And I said, you're right. Let's do that. And so I signed myself up to become a pre-law major. And there was a very, very straightforward advisor from France. And she had a degree in the like metaphysics and all big words. I'll just say that. I didn't really understand it, but she said, listen, you're not going to make any money as an English major. You need to go to law school. Absolutely, 100%. You have these grades, do it. So I did it thinking, great, everything will fall into path. I love to read. I love old books. I can write pretty well. Let's go. I was even so sure of it that I was ready to apply to all these different schools. And I moved across the country. Now, I also met my girlfriend, now wife. So there was a kind of more of an incentive to move across the country, but still packed up everything. It was like, I'm going to go to law school, being this fully type B dude with a large beard who kind of doesn't want to wear suits. They wanted us to wear suits all the time. So I went, and after a semester realized this is not really the path for me. And that felt really great to say. I'm sure it scared my mom when I called her at like 9 o'clock at night and being like, I don't think I can do law school anymore. And then having that conversation on January of 2020, and then a great long period of waiting, as no one wanted to get back to you about your job application that you had submitted in the beginning of the year. So I have learned how to sit with vocation as something that you will not find quickly or easily, which I think just resonates with so many different places in life, whether it be doing ministry, doing creative projects, doing your job, doing relationships. Things do not come with a great deal of certainty in a couple of weeks. You do have to sit with things and realize that you are only able to kind of figure out what you can do for the day and build off of that sometimes, and embrace it and kind of roll with that messiness, because trying to say no to the world all the time is just really frustrating, especially when you're I'm speaking for myself here, have been unemployed during a pandemic. You can't just reject the premise that you're in a pandemic and you don't have a job. You just can't. That's something you can't just say, like, cut that negative energy out. You kind of have.
Okay, you're
in the middle of my most beautiful.
I know you're just like really getting going. As like
yeah. But there's just something to be said going about grace and vocation that sometimes God will put you in a space where you're just like, time to think about vocation without having a job. And thinking about vocation is not just career, has been fun, difficult, but also has taught me a lot about myself. I mean, I have done a little bit of everything now in this pandemic world, where I have sold appliances, not knowing anything about appliances at the beginning, but it was like, I like helping local folks. And then all of a sudden I was fundraising with the ACLU and being like, well, I like talking to people. And now working with kids, I'm like, well, I love helping people find their language. So let's just see how this keeps rolling, and let's see, who knows, maybe next I'm going to be working as like a vet tech. I don't know. And in all of this, it comes up with, I think, learning more about myself and becoming kind of grateful for that messiness, even though it's still something to be frustrated about at times. But I can't really reject it.
Yeah, right. Like you just gotta like live through it, right? And,
yeah. Hmm.
So tell me a little bit about like did you grow up in the Episcopal Church, or did you grow up in a church, or like what's kind of been your spiritual
Yeah.
journey? As much as I don't
Okay.
really love that language, but
No, we can go through it. So I grew up in a tiny country church. So I was didn't grow up Episcopal at all. I grew up in like a tiny country church where it looked like a barn, um, a lovely barn, but still it looked like a large barn. Um, Plenty of animal mounts and plenty of just good old folks in Montana. So that was really my background. And we were just a little community, and then at the same time going into kind of the let's go some spiritual journey language. A large mega church had kind of overgrown the part of Montana where I'm from, so I'll just not keep a name there. Um, but I kind of learned that living on kind of the outside of the bigger, sexier, louder, faster version of church, that wasn't really the space for me, even though I knew a lot of people. Went to a bunch of, they had like rock concert events throughout the week,
wow.
um, as they can because they are large. Um, so I was like, this is not the church space for me. I'm interested in things. I'm kind of nerdy. I'll be with that. I'm a bit of a beatnik granola kind of guy, even in law school. So I just kind of have taken that and rolled with it. And so I was a part of a college ministry that was a lot more nerdier and a lot slower, um, where where we just kind of read a lot of books and just hung out all the time, and that was really great for me. And then through that, I ended up moving out here to Virginia, where my wife and I were like, let's go to Episcopal Church because that seems more inclusive of a lot of the questions and struggles that we'd had, especially with when it comes to LGBTQ inclusion, when it comes to some of the just broad social issues that we thought were being addressed. Um, and when it comes to looking at something different, because both of us had kind of had similar experiences where we had sort of seen this larger sort of American Christian culture and kind of wanted to unplug from that for a little bit and find a space that it was okay to not have all these answers and not sort of move at 100 miles per hour. And so that wound us up here as two two young folks in a very very large, very old church, and have been loving it ever since. I mean, they've fed us, they've wed us, employed us, so we've had a blast.
Yeah, it's interesting because the prevailing wisdom when I was growing up, and even kind of as I got into like my later high school and early college years was like, oh, well, young people like they'll leave the church and then they'll come back when they like get married and have kids.
Mhm.
And that hasn't happened for like
Right.
for a lot of those of us who were maybe raised in the Episcopal Church or raised in other kind of mainline
Mhm.
denominations. But what I have seen, in your story and kind of also through my own parishioners is people that have kind of grown up in either kind of more conservative backgrounds or different kinds of churches and are attracted to both the kind of historical liturgical nature of like being part of something
Mhm.
older, you know what I mean? And also, but also in a space that like is affirming of women in ministry and
Yeah.
LGBTQ plus, acceptance and
Mhm.
championing and like thinks that climate change is a thing. And,
Yeah.
I mean, having kind of grown up in Texas and currently being in Tennessee for the last 13 years, sometimes I kind of like forget that I don't know, some of my colleagues are not like fighting the same battles that I am sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Depending geographically, it can just be so different. Some of my colleagues in like New England or in the Bay Area of California, like they're working against kind of a more like secular culture. And I'm working with like a much more kind of steeped in like American white evangelicalism
Right.
culture. So it's, and like we've talked on this show before, like it's hard to not be like, well, we're not like them, like we're
Yeah.
better Christians, or like they're not actually Christians.
Yeah.
um but I think there is something that I mean, my hope is that the Episcopal Church has something to offer for younger generations who are maybe looking around at the world and kind of saying like, this is not working for me. My experience of Christians is not always great, but like maybe there's something out there like that is
Yeah.
a community where I can explore, a relationship with God and
Mm-hmm.
Jesus, and like also do things that match with my values, socially or politically.
Yeah.
Small p politically, not like necessarily. Um,
Yeah. I think there's such a wisdom. It's such, going back to like grace and growth for me. I mean, to see like other people, I think, preaching and involved in the life of the church who don't look like me, because there are a lot of people who obviously look like me, um, mostly being white dudes with big beards. That's just kind of, I don't know why, but there are so many of us, and sort of in European church history. Um, but it's just so good, I think, also to have a um, really a space that lets you not have every answer, but sometimes just sit with a good question or two. Um, because I think there is such a there is such a demand for, I think, a space for um, for young folks to have kind of a spiritual center that is not just about finding community. I know that community is like such a buzzword, and everyone thinks if you just gather like 20 like young people in a room, then bam, they'll
go to
all like
church.
float up and glow, and then like all of your problems just fix. But people are really looking for that spiritual dimension. I mean, and I think churches can be a place that can actually be excited about that,
Mhm.
and offer something, I think, different. I mean, sure, for me, I'm a bit nerdier, so I like something that's a bit stranger and maybe has a bit more books and things to carry around. My mother is like, why do you have like an extra book with you at church? I'm like, well, that's just kind of, it's fun. It's fun.
It's
That's my
fun.
way of describing the Book of Common Prayer. It's fun. But that space where people can, I think, have some tensions and find some place to be okay to work through them. I think we have, especially in sort of entertainment and in the world of sort of reactions to current events being, a mile a minute. People have to have their lives and their responses to things figured out very quickly, or at least have it demanded of them very quickly. Um, and if you don't, there is definitely a lot of tension if you don't have your reaction and your personal statement on Facebook to be read by your distant aunts and uncles. Um, and churches can be a great place to, I think, ruminate on those, or let those simmer for a while and actually like share what we love, and to just have a space where you can learn about those things. So when it comes to climate, when it comes to uh, when it comes to LGBTQ inclusion, when it comes to racial justice or mass incarceration, when it comes to all of these things, like having a meeting place where people can learn about them and come from all sorts of different backgrounds is so wonderful and it's so helpful. And I love that, but also I go into what you said about not trying to define ourselves as being the sort of not of something else is so good. Because I know in sort of my own personal experience going through and looking for, church traditions or church expressions that look like what I want to be a part of, I can get tired of places that don't try to do, I get tired of places that define themselves by what they're not. And that can be really tiring for them too.
Mm-hmm.
I see it so much that like sometimes I just want to be excited about the gospel,
Yeah. So as our resident Gen Z, or we were talking about before we kind of got on, before we started streaming and recording, one of the funky things about the church, especially the Episcopal Church, is that it does skew quite old in terms of age. And there's good stuff in that, right? Like ideally we'd have kind of a mix. I was talking with a friend of mine who goes to a sort of non-denominational Church of Christ-ish kind of church plant, and she was sort of saying, actually, we have like too many younger people, and like it's been a problem in terms of just trying to get people to volunteer for things or be available, or and yet what that means is that like I've talked about this with friends, people, clergy, especially women clergy into their 50s, are being told like, you're so young, or like you're young enough to be my granddaughter or whatever. And that has happened to me throughout my ordained career, not going on 10 years of being ordained now, so I'm not like a fresh newly ordained person, but still generally in the church am perceived of, and am in terms of the kind of broader spectrum, quite young. And yet every church you interview, every like profile that is looking for a rector, they say, we want somebody who can bring in young people and young families. And so what can churches do to appeal or address the concerns of people in kind of the Gen Z cohort?
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is something that has to do, I think, a lot with where people are at. I don't think the same answer is going to be the same for like a rural church in Montana and a college town parish. I think they're going to have different expressions for it, but I really do think the context for how you can say young people can contribute to the life of the church is super important. I think because people know when they're just sort of being told to just kind of show up, that I think
we just want you there to like look at you and feel like less, devastated about the future of the church kind of.
Yeah, but when they, when people can say that it's not just about you being young, but it's about sort of that you're in this space in life that is either college, or you are looking for other folks who are going through the same struggles with identity. As much as I've, just talked about how this can be a great place to be liminal and work through things, having some answers and, being sort of an advocate for people is really helpful, especially for younger generations. I mean, I think sometimes Episcopal churches can be afraid of being an advocate sometimes. And sometimes it's easy to put up a nice little sign or put up a cute little slogan on your if your church has a little logo board, your sandwich board to say like, we love everyone, no exceptions. But
All are
sometimes there
welcome.
are,
That's our, like, the Episcopal Church welcomes
yeah,
you, right?
yeah, great. But what do you like? How are you actually welcoming people? Um, the context for how people can actually sort of come in is super important. I think that's the next step part, just being available and being interesting.
Mm-hmm.
How can people actually sort of contribute? Because people are still, I think, when people are afraid of asking something of young people or of asking people a little more, I mean, we know now, young people are willing to step up and say what they believe in and are willing to be a part of protests and movements and contribute to things, even if they are just passing around the same $20 through mutual aid campaigns. Like those are all beautiful things in which like young people are motivated and involved to help out. um, it is not that much more pressing to say, you know, the things that you love, the things that you are excited about are also the things that God is excited about.
Mm.
That part of, you know, part of thy kingdom coming is the hope and solidarity to be with those who do not see that. And that you can bring that light, that joy, that grace to people who don't know it. And so those are very broad ideas, but those are very helpful. I mean, there are, of course, all of the myriad of little things where making church available
Right.
for young folks. Just the idea of being able to, listen to what the service is like. I think now we have a world where people can sort of see recorded versions of liturgy, because for some people that's completely new, that's completely foreign. The ability to see that and to understand how that worship looks can be super helpful for folks. But also having events be accessible to young folks who are, a lot of people are working.
Mm-hmm.
So having those outside of just, 10 a.m. on a Thursday.
10 a.m. Bible study. Yeah, there was my church that I was a part of in college. They had their women's Bible study was at like 10:30 on Wednesdays. Mm-hmm. And I was like, it seems to, I mean, and eventually we ended up starting kind of a like 20s, 30s Bible study. Because it was like, I think the men's Bible study was at like 7 a.m., kind of breakfast Bible study. Mm-hmm. But, I've found in my ministry, especially for folks that are like newly graduated from college, or maybe they just moved to an area, there was one guy that I was working with at my first church who like, he worked like night shift, kind of managing trucking and shipping. And so, he usually couldn't come on Sunday mornings, or like was usually too tired to come on Sunday mornings. Mm-hmm. And not too tired in the like, oh, I just didn't want to get up, but in the like, he had been working until 6:30 that morning.
Yeah.
Or I've had other parishioners who like are bartenders, and so they're working until 2:30, 3 on Sunday morning, and so turning around and coming to 8:30 church probably isn't gonna happen. And part of this is just kind of like life under late stage capitalism, where like there isn't sorry, I'm gonna get a little political here.
No, go ahead.
But just the demands of our economic system are now so 24/7, and for people who are in jobs, especially not necessarily like white collar jobs, or even gosh, even doctors and nurses and stuff are often working at abnormal quote unquote hours, and how we're no longer in a culture where Sunday morning, even in the South, is like sacred and set apart. There's commerce happening, there's recreation happening. It's no longer just a given that like, well, it's Sunday morning, so you get up and you go to church. And I've been thinking a lot about the need for the church to be a place of rest and like restoration. And what does that look like in a culture that is so it's busy, and it's busy with things that are often draining to our souls, whether that's commuting or working a job that like maybe is not your like one and only true vocation in love. Like even as somebody who is in a vocation that I love, like it's still exhausting and tiring.
And that's and part of that involves, I think that's just the wonders of boundaries. I think the church gets to be a place where we can unplug people. I mean, I've seen the countless TikToks about how you can turn your passions and your hobbies into hustles, and you can make another, a magical $2,000 a month. Somehow it's like selling your socks on eBay. Right. And maybe you have like some special collector's edition board game that you can get on eBay, and then you too can become a millionaire by the time you're 30. And there are so many ways that this kind of culture, I think, just eats away at our ability to rest, in our ability to see things that are of value but not monetary value, and how the work and things that we do, the labor that we do, can actually kind of look better and can feel more productive and feel more fruitful, and we can feel more healthy about them if we set up times where we don't engage with them. My wife is trained to be a therapist. We can sometimes get like magazines about counseling around the house, and I'll read them so that I can talk to my wife about things that she is working on. And there is a book about the 4-hour work week, and that to me is crazy, but also really interesting. I would love that, because, and I think that the church has a place to play in that, and it is not reinventing the wheel. I think that we have this abundance of gifts, because you're right, we are not just all looking to bring in young people. We do want to be a generational thing. We want it to be families of folks who, not just by blood, but by people we meet along the way. And we have, within the Book of Common Prayer, I mean, there are services that go throughout the day. You can have things for just people who need something like in the middle of the week on the mornings. Great. You can have things for people in the evenings. Not everything has to be big and orchestrated and have choirs. You can have people hearing things, reading and resonating with them, and just sitting with that for a bit. You can have things that are conversations, but also guided by liturgy and excitement. You can have, I think, this is something that's a bit funny to me, but you could do like worship experiences. You can have just moments where you can try to blend the liturgical world and the contemporary Christian music world, bring those together on late nights. I've always thought about, wouldn't it be fun if we did a version of like garage band culture and Compline together, bring them together. I mean, it's a late night liturgy experience. I'm sure someone can come up with shoegaze hymns, so we don't have to really reinvent the wheel at all. I mean, we have kind of these gifts kind of laying around to kind of unplug the world and create sort of boundaries in our life that make some healthy space for us to not be these machines. And I think that's really attractive in a world that asks a lot of both good and bad things from us. I mean, I think there are times to hold ourselves accountable and be able to be more engaged in a world that we have just kind of plug and played our care and concern for our neighbors, but also, there are plenty of bad things where we need to sort of be consistently available to our bosses, or to be to be working 2 or 3 jobs, or to just a myriad of things. And I think the church getting to be that space where that doesn't have to happen, and that things can be valuable and exciting and fun, and things can also be confusing and messy and sad, and that can all happen without you having to produce something from that. You don't have to do anything to be in a healthy space with that. The grace, the healing, all of that is something that Jesus knows. I mean, to give you that sweet gospel message. I mean, he,
Bring it home.
I mean, we have a great high priest who sympathizes with us, who empathizes, who listens to us, who tells us to, grieve with those who grieve and weep with those who weep. This is an opportunity to do that, in a world that is asking us to do too much. So.
Yeah, I mean, even in the church, and I find myself having this, whenever you meet somebody, it's, like, what's your name, blah, 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 and then what do you do? Like, that's your kind of, that's the go-to question, right? And I think having the church be a place where it is less about what you do and kind of more about who you are as like a beloved child of God, is countercultural in a way that like doesn't, I mean, it isn't like, yeah, we're taking a stand, but it's providing this alternative source of identity that you're not, your job title, you're not your salary, you're not, where you go to make money, but you're a beloved child of God. You're, the person who makes the communion bread, or you're the person that like brings the good donuts for coffee hour, or like,
yes,
it's like, I think that's really lovely. Phil was talking about last week that he was having a funeral, and the funeral was for somebody quite remarkable, and that a sitting senator was giving one of the eulogies, and he was like, but in church you never would have known that this guy was a big shot, and having church be that place of like, you don't know who's the high price lawyer and who's the janitor, or who's the teacher and who's the doctor, or whatever, like that. I mean, those are certainly gifts that we bring to the community that is the church, but it's not like your sole identity.
It's just, it's so healthy to have a place where we can just not have to make up identity. I mean, how, like, people can see it. I mean, I'm sure that you've seen it and I've seen it, where people say that they're countercultural, and really they just mean a different kind of culture that is not the dominating culture of wherever they are at. And so it's just become this different cultural identity, and then you'll be cool. And just to unplug from the need to be sort of either with and for a bunch of ideas, but just already have this beautiful identity that has been seen and loved and known about you already. And you can just kind of sit with that, I think is so healthy and so needed right now.
Yeah. And, I think one of, as you were kind of talking, I was thinking about some suggestions that I've heard other people make, especially in a world where, our country, where like everyone is very mobile. And so like, as you kind of mentioned, like you're not living in the same place that you grew up in, you're across the country now. Like, how do you kind of make connections? How do you, especially in a place of like, hey, I need to find a job. Like I need to pay my rent. And the church maybe being a place of that kind of like ability to make connections, ability to kind of know people, and like, hey, I know this guy, he's really great, like he'd be perfect for this thing that this other person I know is looking for. And being that community in a world where like it's kind of hard to make that community when we are constantly kind of moving around. And I know, like, I think you said, Norfolk's kind of a big military town.
Yeah.
So you've probably got some, just a lot of transients. And I mean, the same is true of Nashville. A lot of people are they come in for school and they leave, or they come in and are working in a field and then they move somewhere else. And it's hard to, it's always sad to kind of say goodbye to people. And yet, like, I always kind of remind people that we're blessing as they leave, that like, we're all part of the church. Like we're all part of the same family. So this isn't goodbye. It's just see you later. You're always part of this parish, and you're certainly always welcome back. And that kind of, keeping in touch with, and even as people go elsewhere, to maintain those relationships and to live out, what we say, which is that we're part of the body of Christ. We're part of this family.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's so amazing to see how, Christ was a stranger to us, and Christ was a stranger to folks in his own time, and to see folks who are coming in as gifts, because Jesus was a gift who came in the form of the stranger, and to celebrate with that, to celebrate people who are coming in from different places, and to realize just the abundance of gifts that we have in our own community. If we're vulnerable and honest enough, like, we have just a little bit here or there that we can give, and also, helping people be vulnerable enough to not live in this sort of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but to be like, realize that they need help, because that was totally difficult for me to be like, hey, I need a job. And to be like, this has been going on for like a month or so, and this has been really frustrating, because there's just so much stigma around that here. They're like, why don't you just get the fast food job that's paying a lot right now, and then find another job later? And I'm like, what? That's not how it works. You need that community. You need each other to hold yourself accountable to vulnerability, to a deeper love, because that's really where you get to see the gifts of inviting the stranger in, and seeing that you really are much more a family than first you thought.
Yeah, I think to kind of circle back around to our conversation about grace that we sort of opened with.
Yeah.
So I find I've found kind of as a priest and a teacher and pastor, people really struggle with the idea of grace, because it does put us in that vulnerable receiving posture. And so much of our dominant ethos is like, I'm independent, I'm strong, I don't need anybody's help. And if I do need somebody's help, it means that I'm weak, or I'm lesser than. And I've been working with a friend of mine who just had surgery, but that surgery was delayed because of COVID cases in the hospital were so high. And she is a single woman, lives alone, and a bunch of her friends were like, okay, well, what can we do? And she finally kind of said, I need people to help me walk my dog, because her condition was making her have trouble breathing, and she just didn't have the kind of stamina to wear out her dog.
Yeah.
And so we all got together, and like, we each took a day, and I'd take my dog over, and we'd take her dog, and we'd go hike. And she was like, it's hard for me to receive this gift with no expectation that it be returned. And I was like, yeah, like, people think it's hard to give, but it's actually a lot harder in our culture to receive, and to receive freely, without kind of being like, well, I owe you, or, I'll get next lunch or whatever. Like, but, and that, I think, is a good practice for receiving the grace of God, is receiving the gifts that other people have to offer us, and without kind of, a lot of times when people give you a compliment, you're like, oh, this old thing, or like, oh no, and it's like, just receive it. And I think that's been even in those small ways, a spiritual practice for me of just learning to receive people's gifts and offerings, without kind of trying to return the favor, hoping that like it'll all kind of work out, I mean. And the people that seem to us to be needy or needing more, are giving in their own way. So it's not like this person's a taker and this person's a giver or whatever.
No, I think it's like the more the definition is more of our relationship to each other. Like there is something, it's not just about giving and taking, but it's about like what we share in the gift together. And that need to that space in between is actually kind of really beautiful. I mean, that's where we see mercy instead of just performing sacrifice. I mean, that's what Jesus says is cool. So
well, again, thank you so much for being with me today. And one last question: what have you been listening to?
Yeah, so I mean, as fall has been entering the air, I have to return to representing my Montana roots and our good Montana native Colin Meloy and the Decemberists. So, gotta bring that back. They always feel appropriate in the fall.
Yes.
And so just enjoying the occasional sea shanty and other things that they try to bring about. It's always just a good time. How about you?
So I took a little bit of a dive into Brandi Carlile's new album yesterday, and I'm gonna maybe say something controversial. I am not like a big Brandi Carlile fan, but I know a lot of my friends are and like really love her, and so I'm trying. And I think there's something that I don't like about her voice.
Oh no.
I like the album. I'm just not like the people that I know who are into Brandi Carlile are like really into Brandi Carlile.
There are some devoted fans, yes.
And I'm kind of like, I like it, but I'm not like, am I missing something? Like I just I like the new album. It does feel very like fallish to me. I also I was telling Phil, not this past weekend, but the weekend before, I went to go see Big Frida at the Cannery Ballroom here in Nashville. And that was quite a show and got me back into kind of like some New Orleans bounce when I want to like little more energy,
Okay.
But yeah, that was, I will say, as we're approaching, I mean, it's a little bit further down the road, but if anyone is like in the mood for some Christmas music right now, Big Frida's Christmas album is maybe one of my favorite Christmas albums.
I like that.
It is not. It is not your standard Christmas album. I will just say that. So
good.
Also, for anybody who's listening, it's like a little more R-rated than a lot of other suggestions that we have. Yeah.
Now I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
An R-rated Christmas album? Is that allowed?
Yeah. So again, Jackson, thanks for being here. Phil will be back next week at same time, same day, next Tuesday. And until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful week.
Bye.